The leaves of the tree are for healing.
Hello everybody. So in this video I want to talk about the fact that there's no such thing as evil. People often think I'm crazy for saying such a thing. They understand that there are murders, rapes, and pedophilia, and chemtrails, and poisons in our food, and microwaving your food takes out all the nutrients, and it goes on and on and on, and they think that these people have done this to keep us down, and they think these elite are somehow ruling over us. And it's a perspective. And what I found, from 2015 and waking up and researching things, I found that belief is sort of prevalent in the supposed truther community, the mainstream Christian community, that there is a god of this world, Satan, and the elites worship Satan, so they do his bidding. I have videos on why the word Satan in the Bible means the adversary. I don't believe there was a specific angel that fell and is trying to war against the Creator, because in Job, the adversary works for the Creator, Yahweh. Now, some would say if the Creator is sending an adversary, Satan, to you, that Creator must be evil. We get into the Demiurge belief, and this belief is prevalent. Even if people don't say they believe in the Demiurge, if you believe in evil, you are basically believing in the Demiurge belief. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he said things were good. He created people, and he said they were good, very good on the last day. And I have a video about the primal Adam. The early followers of Jesus or Yehoshua didn't believe that Adam actually sinned. And it was likely a positive thing that we learned good and evil for a purpose. But, well, I'll get into that here. My point is, there are people out there who, maybe they got raped and they look at me like, how could you not believe in evil? I understand what it is like to see the bad in the world. But if we say that things are evil, as in there's something really wrong with that, then we get stuck in this belief that the Creator created an evil world. And that is the Demiurge belief. And I've found through my studies and just everything I've been through, my experiences, that world view keeps you very angry and or fearful. And you can see my video on attuning to God's love, that higher frequency. And that love casts out all fear and anger, because we have to be forgiving. And if you're forgiving, then you're no longer angry anymore. The forgiveness, and anger are opposite ends of the spectrum. You can't be forgiving and still be angry. And you can't be angry and be forgiving. We have to choose one or the other. And Jesus, or Yehoshua, said that if you don't forgive people, you can't be forgiven. So we need to forgive people. And in that forgiving, you lose the anger. But I see a lot of people in the mainstream Christian or truther community and or really angry at people, at evil, right? They get very upset. And as I talked about in that video about attuning to love, God's frequency, if you are upset by something, it's yanking your chain. Yanking your chain. It goes off in this direction and you follow. If something gets moved, you follow when you're connected to it. And if something moves and you're not connected to it, you're no longer going to be yanked. And so if you are yanked, you've created that chain and you say, I'm going to be a slave to that thing that I'm angry at. It's only in forgiving that you can be free. And when you're free, you're no longer angry. And when you're no longer angry, you can see that there is no such thing as evil. And that's where I've gotten. I still struggle once in a while with some things that I get upset about. But I'm getting much closer to being okay with it. And then some would call you delusional. Like I said, if somebody got raped and they don't want to forgive, they're not going to want to hear that it was not evil. We can call things good and bad in this world. When we come into this world, we are born neither good nor evil, according to the Clementine homilies. 8, if you're interested. We are born neither good nor evil, but we choose one or the other. And then, you can go on a downhill journey, or you can go up and become good. Or you can go up and become good and go down to evil again, and then come back up again. We call things good and bad to understand the difference in this world. This is a world of opposites. It's a world for us to choose one or the other. You see something you don't like, you don't do it. If you see something you do like, you can do it. So maybe you grew up and people lied to you and you thought, well, I don't like being lied to. So you want to not lie. And you go about not lying, and that's good. Not lying is good. Lying is bad. Lying will lead you into more and more lies, more and more sin as you go. Sin is bad because it enslaves you. But as I've talked about, once you sin, you've given the demons the power to harass you. And as I talked about in other videos, the demons may have been something you created yourself to convict you. It's hard to think of demons as anything but bad when you're dealing with the consequences of them coming at you. I was, in 2015, led to start doing Our Father's will. And when I did that, the demons attacked me. And then I got very fearful. And I started becoming like a hypochondriac, looking up all these different symptoms and thinking I was, going to die of cancer or something. And I was just going crazy. But these demons, they were doing a good thing. They were letting me see the consequences of my actions. They were leading me to hit rock bottom, call out to God, and get saved. And now that I have been saved from being a slave to demons, slave to sin, now that I have been saved, I do these videos to help other people see the light. So were those demons a good or a bad thing? Well, they were very good. The demons were very good because they convicted me into repenting so that I would do Our Father's will. When somebody has demonic forces, it's, attacking them. I think it's basically them or their higher self or their spirit or whatever you want to call it, trying to wake them up, trying to tell them, stop sinning, stop it. You're hurting yourself. You're becoming a slave. Don't you see it? You're a slave to the whims of these demons. Don't you see it? And when you see it, you repent and get free. So you're no longer tossed about by every wind or doctrine, about every other thing that's coming on in your life. When you get saved, you're no longer feeling that fear anymore. I had somebody recently comment on my videos about how I should be afraid that I've lost my way because I stopped taking Paul as gospel. I still quote him, I think when the stuff that was supposedly written by him was actually good, as of course you can see my video on why I still quote Paul. But, there's people are still stuck in fear. But it just, no matter how afraid somebody else is, afraid for me, afraid of what I'm doing, afraid that I'm leading people into destruction by telling them that they can stop sinning, it's not going to faze me because I've already been through that and I'm already past it. When you get up to that higher frequency of agape love where you're forgiving people and understanding and merciful, because that's all Yahweh ever wanted was for us to be merciful and forgive others as we would want to be forgiven and love them like we'd want to be loved. When you get to that point, you aren't angry anymore. You aren't fearful anymore. And that is the most freeing thing in the entire world. And no matter how much somebody else wants to drag you down into that fear realm again, it's not going to work. But it takes a little work climbing the ladder up to agape love. As I've talked about in many of my videos, it's something we have to do. But when you do, you get free. And you no longer see this world. And I've talked about this before, but we are in the same world, but we're not in the same frequency, dimension. Let's say a dimension of frequency. I'm not one to believe in parallel worlds. Doesn't mean they don't exist. Maybe they do, but that's not my viewpoint. But what I'm saying is that as I'm here, I know somebody else here. And we can talk on the phone. There can be communication between us, but there's a frequency gulf fixed. Just like with Abraham's bosom and the rich man and Lazarus, right? There's a gulf between them fixed. This person is in a lower frequency. I'm in a higher frequency. We can communicate. I can say something, they can hear it. This person can say something, I can hear it. We're in the same world. We're not on the same frequency. And it feels like a different dimension when we talk. I don't think the earth is a globe. They think it's a globe. We aren't even living in the same world because of that perspective shift. When I first was looking into the idea of the flat earth, I'm not saying it's flat, I'm just saying it's not a globe. When I started looking into it, I looked at the Bible, I prayed, first day, I was watching these videos and I'm like, I can't believe what other people say. I can't trust them. And I prayed to the Father, I said, Father, you let me know what's going on. And the first thing I was led to do was read Genesis 1 from the very beginning. Let's see how he created the earth. And I read it in verse 7. I was like, wow. Well, that's what you can do with the Spirit. You can ask for an answer and get it that quickly. It didn't take me months of struggling, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It was the first day. I mean, the first day I heard of it, I actually turned off the video thinking, oh my gosh, what a stupid person, and just, whatever. Turned it off. And I just thought they were crazy. And of course, I'm not surprised that this person over here might think that I'm crazy over here because I used to be that way. And that gives you understanding. When you understand that people don't see things the way you do because they're just not there yet, you can be a lot more merciful and forgiving and understanding. So I understand that there is a different perspective. When I woke up the next day and I looked up, I was like, the world just seemed completely different. And that was all in my mind because the world was exactly the same. It was like dimensional frequency shift of some sort. I just wake up the next morning and I see the world in a completely different view, frequency wise, I guess. No longer is, the creator so far away from me. I felt like he was very close. And that this creation was not just chance, but was really created on purpose. And he was right there with us. And I've had a different shift since then where I don't know that he is right above the firmament, as I know other people say, but that he is right inside of me. And I don't have to go somewhere to see him. He's always there. And it's just another frequency shift in my perspective. So we can live in the same world and just not be on the same page, not be on the same frequency as somebody else. And so it feels like we're in different dimensions while we're still living in the exact same world as somebody else. So there's a lot of people right now who live in this world, but they think the God of this world is Satan. And I don't. Unless you use the term the world to refer to the people, as the Bible does, rather than this actual creation. The God of this creation is Yahweh, and he's all powerful and all loving, and this world is very good. And so once you start saying something in this world was bad, then you start saying the creator was bad. If you say that, well, Adam and Eve sinned, they brought sin into the world, well, then you have to say that the creator, Yahweh, actually created sinful people that could go into sin, as if that's something bad. And you're still saying that the creator is bad or incompetent. So any sin that happened by these people that were created by the creator, if it's bad, if any sin is bad, then you're saying the creator is bad for creating something that could be sinful. That the possibility was there, and if that possibility happens, that it was bad. And that's not true. I can read some from the Clementine works about how these things are good for us. The sin, the temptation is a good thing, for it can lead to great rewards for those who don't fall into temptation. And I will. But I wanted to make that point that if we think of anything in this world as bad, then we are making the creator of this world into something that is bad. And I think that's why I have so many videos in my playlist on why I reject the Demiurge. Now, as I talked about Paul, besides the people who think that you have to listen to Paul, the mainstream Christians who say if you reject Paul, then you're rejecting the truth of the sacrifice and you're going to be lost and die in hellfire and all that stuff, whatever. They've got their own opinion, and I'm not going to be angry at them because I know that I could have been them with an upbringing like they had. And then there's the opposite end where the people that do think Paul was a false apostle, then they start hating Paul and they can't even listen to a thing that he supposedly said. But Paul was for a purpose. The things that he wrote, well, a lot of them are good. And I think that he stole those things from other people or just copied it or whatever, or things got mislabeled as Paul, even though it wasn't him and everything. But regardless of all that, he's there for a purpose. And our Father put life and death before us. And Paul is a good understanding of the death, because if you take Paul wrong, you can be led, or take Paul right or whatever. If you take it in the wrong spirit, you can be led to death because you think it's okay to sin. If you take Paul in a good way with a good spirit, you can find things like emptying yourself in Philippians 2, which I did a video on, and be led to life. We were given life or death. And who gave us life or death? Yahweh, the creator. He gave us life or death, and death leads to curses. When you don't obey the laws, the rules of this world, the game of life, the rules of the game of life, if you don't abide by those rules, you suffer the curses. And if you can abide by the rules, then you get blessed. And that's what this world is. It's a place where there's rules and a lot of lawbreakers who are getting cursed right now. And then they complain that the game's not fair because there were some consequences for sinning. Well, it's a good thing to have rules. We need to have rules, right? And, well, another thing that we need the good and the bad in order to see the good. So if you don't have any bad in the world, how can you possibly know what good is? So in the beginning, when God created the primal Adam, if everything was all peachy keen, everything was going great, then how would you know everything was going great? And the Clementine Homilies, I believe it's 8, talks about how people were ungrateful. They were ungrateful because they didn't know what the opposite of good was. In order to be grateful for how amazing it can be, how beautiful and amazing this world is, in order to be grateful, you have to be seeing the opposite. And, if you think about a movie, they have those tropes, right? The way things go in most movies, boy meets girl, falls in love, something happens and they break up and it's so sad. And then they get back together and everything's great. You need the sad part because watching a movie where they just meet and fall in love and stay together and nothing ever bad happens in the movie, and then you watch to the end and then that's it. They live happily ever after and there was never anything bad. Would you say that's a good movie, or would you say, well, it's kind of boring? Nothing ever happened. In order to enjoy the reconciliation at the end, you need them to break up. Just like the primal Adam had to break up from God. They had to fall away from him to be reconciled to him. And of course, when I talk about the primal Adam, I'm talking about mankind in general, because I don't think Adam sinned. But mankind in general, they became ungrateful and they stopped loving Yahweh because they just didn't know what the opposite was. And when you fall and you sin and you get led into this and that, and you see how much of a slave to fear and anger you were when you repent and you get to reconcile in agape love with Yahweh at the end, it's like, boom, wow, this world is amazing, fantastic, unbelievable. You cannot even appreciate how amazing it is until you've actually been a slave, which is what my life was all about. I was doing good. I got led into sin. More and more sin leads to another, right? Sin begets sin. And then everything went to crap. And then I was tortured by demons. And then I hit rock bottom. And then I got saved. And now everything's going great. Fantastic. Amazing. This world is fantastic. And you can't appreciate that until you've been to hell in your own mind. This world is hell on earth for people in their minds. But they don't want to leave yet. Because the way to leave is to forgive. And there's a lot of people out there who don't want to forgive. Because they think, but this person's doing this, and this person's doing that, and they're chemtrailing us, and they're putting poisons in our vaccines and in our food, and these are people, blah, 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 blah. And all they want to do is talk about those people and what they do. And like I've said, if you talk about those people and what they do, and that is keeping you in a state of unforgiveness, you are saying, I want to be their slave. I'm not ready to forgive them. God, I'm not ready for forgiveness yet. I want to stay a slave to them because I want to keep being angry at them. And you got to make a decision, and that's what this video is all about. You have to make a decision. Are you ready to just let go and be free? Are you ready to be free? Because don't you want to be? You got to forgive them. You got to pray that they would find forgiveness. And also my video about how we were born sinless. We're born perfect. The Creator created us. There's no such thing as original sin. Our Father knitted us in the womb and He called us for a purpose. He called us for a purpose. He called everybody for a purpose. We were all created, neither good nor evil, to do something in this world, to do our Father's will. We make the decision of what we're going to do, but other people are making their decision. But you don't have to focus on what they're doing. When you focus on what they're doing, you're making yourself a slave to them. So when you stop focusing on what they're doing, you can see that they've just got their own life. And they're bringing upon themselves the Essene mirrors. They're bringing upon themselves the hell on earth. Because if they are doing what they're doing, they're still stuck a slave to sin. They're still slaves. The people who are supposedly elites over you, ruling over you, they're still slaves. But you could be free. So who's really ruling over who? So you can be free if you forgive them. And that doesn't mean going up to somebody and telling them, hey, I forgive you of that, because they haven't repented yet. It's all inside of you. And you can see my video on getting attuned to Yahweh's love for more on that. I really don't want to focus on that here because I did there, but that's how we move on and we become free. And if we were all born sinless, that means Paul was born sinless, but he got led into sin. How did he do that? How did that happen? He got transformed by the world around him. He got led into temptations. And when he said that, he withstood Peter face to face rather than going private with Peter or Kepha. Rather than going in private, he withstood him face to face. He was very angry. He let his anger get the best of him. So he still had his own sins he was dealing with. And what did that lead to? Well, it led to a bunch of people today calling him a false apostle and dragging his name through the mud. These people were groomed by the world, and that's what happens to people today. We could be angry at that, or we could be forgiving and understanding and just say, I'm not going to do that. This world has contrast, and we have to just choose. Is microwaving something good for me? I said no. Well, then don't do it. It's that simple. You don't need to get upset that other people are still doing it. They're their own person. They're at their own place, and they're still a slave to demons if they're still doing things that are bad for them. So pray for them. If you want somebody to get help, you can't just get mad at them and shake them really hard. And you just got to pray for them and just hope that they come to the truth. And we just can't, we have to work on ourselves. That's the best way to get healed, is to work on yourself. And again, speaking of people that were born not evil, then that means Hitler was born not evil. He was born perfect, who could choose good or evil. And over time, he chose bad, poorly. And the same thing happens to people today all over the world. And whenever you choose the poor decision, whenever you choose death versus life in any kind of circumstance, you're leading yourself to a place where you're going to repent at some point, or you're going to die. And I do believe in reincarnation. I do believe that we were given an understanding. I think that the people who are going through something that is bad chose it for a purpose. There's a lot of people who do think that, the babies that are led into these illnesses from birth, or they're starving to death or whatever, and even the animals perhaps, that these are sort of enlightened souls or spirits, I should say, who came for a purpose. And a lot of people would think, well, it's really hard to believe that I chose this life if you've gone through something negative in your life. And there's other people who think it's really hard to believe that a child who got injured by vaccines chose that, especially when they can't remember choosing that. But in order to do what they have to do, they can't remember. And I did a video about that, about the fact that we need to forget a past life or whatever to be able to do what we have to do here. Because I was led, like I said, I was like going up. I'm good, pretty good, And then I was led into sin and went down, down, down into some crap. And I believe that I came here for a purpose, because how could I preach how we can be free from being a slave to sin if I was never a slave to sin? How can I do that? How can I preach the good news of being free if I was never a slave? How can people come in and help people if they don't know what it's like to be without help? And we enter this world and we have these experiences that rub us the wrong way, and then we change our perspective and do things right in the end, because we know what it's like to be on that other path. So it's very believable to me that people have chosen some very awful lives in order to show us, to be a mirror to us, what could be, and how thankful we can be that we don't have that experience. And thankful that we can be that they have shown us what it could have been like. And so in that perspective, we shouldn't feel bad that there are people or animals that are going through some very, very, very awful lives, the bad. And it's there for a purpose, to show us what could be good. What could we do differently? Or be a mirror to people who haven't gotten there yet. Or be a reminder of something that we should be thankful for, that we're not doing that, or we're not going through that. So in that case, they have come for a good purpose. And we should be very thankful that they came. Bless them, pray for them. But understand there's a reason that they're there. And other people still need help. Other people are still going to be around those people or animals, and they're still going to be convicted of their own either ungratefulness or their own negative behaviors, mean behaviors towards others. They're not taking care of others. When you see somebody beating an animal, you can understand that that animal is showing you the negative things of this world, but also that person that was beating the animal is being convicted. That person who was beating the animal had a decision, and they chose poorly. And of course, according to the Unseen mirrors and the law of attraction and the rules of the game of life, that person who was beating the animal is going to be having consequences for that in their life right now. We don't have to be the one to impose consequences on that person. It's already in their life. Father's already taken care of that. We don't have to worry about it. And at some point, they will repent, whether it's in this life or afterwards. You can see my video on the lake of fire for more information on that. I do think if we don't go through it in this life, then we have to go through it in the next. And that's why a lot of people who have near-death experiences will report seeing a review of their life and feeling what they did to another. So when they have that life review, they're going to feel every single beating that they gave an animal. They're going to feel that. And when they feel that, they may really repent and want to be put back into this life, and they may choose a life where they get beaten by their father so they can understand the other person's perspective more, so that they can learn and grow. And then can you be upset that this child was beaten if it's now becoming a better version of themselves, learning what it is like to be helpless? And then over time they grow, and maybe they now are going to teach against domestic violence and things like that, So we all have things in our life, but they're for a purpose. They're there to teach us, to help us grow, and we should understand that there is no such thing as good or bad. In reality, it's all good. It's all teaching us so that we will all repent and lead to the end. So think of this life, this creation, as a rom-com. In the beginning, Adam and Eve were one with the Father. And let's say mankind, the primal Adam, whatever, however you want to think about it, somehow people sinned. And they were separated from the Father. Wisdom got taken out of Adam, right? It's just like Eve, or, wisdom comes out of Yahweh just like Eve comes out of Adam. They came apart. No longer had that wisdom anymore. They were following the Antichrist spirit. They're following folly, These things are personified in Proverbs, if you're interested. Folly and Lady Wisdom. So they were following folly now. They're no longer following the wisdom of the Creator. And they go through life. Yahweh's always trying to get people to come back to him. Some people do, some people don't. But mankind in general is very fallen. They're very separated. And you can see that everybody's been disassociating from each other and getting more and more fragmented, as I've talked about in other videos. But like every rom-com, at some point, they're going to come back together. And it's going to be amazing. And we cannot have this amazing, wonderful prodigal son returning to the Father feast if the prodigal son never left. If we never fell into sin. If we never knew what it was like to be a slave to sin. How could you celebrate in being free? Free at last. How can you celebrate being free at last like a calf leaping from the stall if you've never been stuck as a calf in the stall? It's all for a purpose. So I'm just going to read some of the Clementine scriptures. This is from the Nazarene Acts, and I'll put the PDF link below. So this is the chapter about existence of evil. And then Kepha, that is the Apostle Peter, said, "If you truly wish to learn first, learn this. How unskillfully you have framed your question, for you say, since Yahweh has created all things, whence is evil? But before you ask this, 3 sorts of questions should have had the precedence. First, whether there be evil. Secondly, what evil is. Thirdly, to whom it is and whence. To this, Simon, the magician, answered, O you most unskillful and unlearned, is there any man who does not confess that there is evil in this life? Whence I also, thinking that you had even the common sense of all men, asked whence is evil, not as wishing to learn, since I know all things, least of all from you, who know nothing, but that I might show you to be ignorant of all things. And that you may not suppose that it is because I am angry that I speak somewhat sternly, know that I am moved with compassion for those who are present, whom you are attempting to deceive. Then Kepha said, the more immoral are you if you can do such wrong, not being angry, but smoke must rise where there is fire. Nevertheless, I will tell you, lest I should seem to take you up with words so as not to answer to those things that you have spoken disorderly. You say that all confess the existence of evil, which is verily false, for first of all, the whole Hebrew tribe denies its existence. And continuing on in the PDF, the chapter, Yahweh the author of good, not of evil. To this, Kepha, the Apostle Peter, answered, since then you confess that you are ignorant, now learn. Your question demanded our deliverance on two matters that are contrary to one another. For every motion is divided into two parts, so that a certain part is moved by necessity and another by will. And those things that are moved by necessity are always in motion. Those that are moved by will, not always. For example, the sun's motion is performed by necessity to complete its appointed circuit, and every state and service of heaven depends upon necessary motions. But man directs the voluntary motions of his own actions, and thus there are some things that have been created for this end, that in their services they should be subject to necessity, and should be unable to do aught else than what has been assigned to them. And when they have accomplished this service, the Creator of all things, who thus arranged them according to his will, preserves them. But there are other things in which there is a power of will, and that have a free choice of doing what they will. These, as I have said, do not remain always in that order in which they were created, but according as their will leads them, and the judgment of their minds inclines them, they effect either good or evil. And therefore he has proposed rewards to those who do well and penalties to those who do evil. So he's saying there are some things in this world that just work the way they're going to work. The sun moves around the earth, not the earth around the sun, but the sun moves around the earth in its circuit. And there's certain things in this world that move accordingly to his plan. And perhaps the leaders of the nations are moving according to his plan. Whereas when we choose to do good or evil, then our leaders are dependent upon how we're doing. So if we were all repentant, then we could get a good leader who would lead us in a good direction. But because the majority of people are not repentant, then you end up with a leader who leads you into destruction. And where you go depends upon how you are as a nation. That's how it worked in the Old Testament. So perhaps there's no reason to be angry at our leaders, because the Father only lets the leaders do what they're going to do based on how the nation is working, living, reacting to things. If we were very repentant, perhaps Yahweh would just change the way our leaders worked. And so can we really be angry at the leaders who are over us if our Father is the one who put them over us, and it's just based on who we are inside that directs how our leaders are going to act? And it seems like the less moral as a nation our country has become, the less moral our leaders have become. But when people lead to repentance, perhaps the leadership will just continue to get rid of the negative things that are in our lives. So we should be less focused on being angry at supposed evil in the leadership and understand that's just a reflection of who we are as a nation. And the same goes for all the other countries around the world. And then it further talks about how if you have no choice in the matter, then it isn't considered evil or good, or we should say good or bad or whatever. It can't be considered one or the other if there's no choice in the matter, which I'll continue reading. But that makes complete sense, of course. If you did a good deed, but you could have done nothing else but do that good deed, then it wasn't really a good deed. You're just doing what you had to do. So continuing on in the next chapter, who has resisted his will? You say therefore, if Yahweh wishes anything to be, it is, and if he does not wish it, it is not. But if I were to answer that what he wishes is, and what he wishes not is not, you would say then that he wishes the evil things to be done that are done in the world, since everything that he wishes is, and everything that he wishes not is not. But if I had answered that it is not so, that what Yahweh wishes is, and what he wishes not is not, then you would retort upon me that Yahweh must be then powerless, if he cannot do what he wills, and you would be all the more petulant as thinking that you had got a victory, though had said nothing to the point. Therefore you are ignorant, O Simon, yea, very ignorant, how the will of Yahweh acts in each individual case. For some things, as we have said, he has willed to be, that they cannot be otherwise than as they are ordained by him. And to these he has assigned neither rewards nor punishments, but those that he has willed to be, so that they have it in their power to do what they will, he has assigned to them according to their actions and their wills, to earn either rewards or punishments. Since therefore, as I have informed you, all things that are moved are divided into two parts, according to the distinction that I formerly stated, everything that Yahweh wills is, and everything that he wills not is not. Continuing on in the next chapter, no goodness without liberty. To this Simon answered, was not he able to make us all such that we should be good, and that we should not have it in our power to be otherwise? Kepha answered, this also is an absurd question, for if he had made us of an unchangeable nature, and incapable of being moved away from good, we should not be really good, because we could not be aught else. And it would not be of our purpose that we were good, and what we did would not be ours, but of the necessity of our nature. But how can that be called good, which is not done of purpose? And on this account the world required long periods, until the number of spirits that were predestined to fill it should be completed, and then that visible sky should be folded up like a scroll, and that which is higher should appear, and the spirits of the blessed, being restored to their bodies, should be ushered into light. But the spirits of the immoral, for their impure actions being surrounded with fiery spirit, should be plunged into the abyss of unquenchable fire, to endure punishments through eternity. Now that these things are so, Yeshua has testified to us concerning whom, if you wish to know that he is a Navi or prophet, I will instruct you by innumerable declarations. For of those things that were spoken by him, even now everything that he said is being fulfilled, and those things that he spoke with respect to the future are believed to be about to be fulfilled, for faith is given to the future from these things that have already come to pass. As I've spoken about in my Lake of Fire article, which I'll leave a link to below, the word for eternity or forever is often translated from aeon, which actually just means age. And it talks about here about long periods, which are like long ages, long time periods. So the next line here is now that these things are so. So it's likely that this is probably an age that was already happening. Because it says now that these things are so, Yeshua has testified to us. So saying now that these things have actually happened. So obviously eternity didn't happen at that time when he was saying this. So it can't mean forever. But it is very interesting that they're saying that the sky would be folded up like a scroll, and he's saying now that these things are so, Yeshua has testified to us. So it's very interesting if he's saying that already happened at that point. And it could be because a lot of people talk about Revelations, the book of Revelation being about 70 AD and things like that. You can see the Antichrist for Dummies playlist for more information on that too. Continuing on here, and does talk about good and evil in pairs. So even though they don't believe in evil, they still have the words good and bad that we have to use. And even the tree, knowledge of good and evil, is actually the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. It's not necessarily evil, but just being able to make a decision between something that's bad for you and something that's good for you. Bad things are things that lead to sin, to death, to slavery. Those things are bad. You want to be free, and so you don't want to be a slave to sin. And good things are things that free you. to be able to not be a slave. And I've talked about that. It doesn't just have to be about lusts of the flesh or emotions. It can also be about what you eat, because when you get parasites, they might want you to eat a lot of sugary things so that they can breed and live in you. Whereas if you ate a lot of the fruits and seeds, plants, plant-based diet, basically, that we were given in the Garden of Eden, then you might even detox from them and basically kill them off if you weren't having sugar that was feeding them, etc. So when you eat, you're making a decision whether you're going to be a slave to the parasites or not. So, we obviously want to kill off parasites and things like that, and I've talked about that in previous videos, but basically you want to be free. You don't want to be a slave. And so it's not just being a slave to sin, a slave to demons. Sometimes it's a slave to parasites, slave to bad bacteria overgrowth, the candida overgrowth, etc. So we want to be free. That is good. So when you make the decision of what to eat, what you eat, if it frees you from being a slave to cravings for sugar, then that's good. If it leads you to have more cravings for sugar, such as feeding the parasites whatever they want to, then you're choosing the bad option, because you're choosing to be a slave to parasites and do what they want you to do. And of course, I've gotten into the whole fasting thing. Once you fast, then you feel like you're starving and like you're going to die and you need to eat. And sometimes that's parasites just wanting to eat because they're the ones who are dying. And so that's why you feel like you're dying. That's why you feel so much pain about it. And that's why after a certain few days, supposedly the cravings aren't as bad anymore, because the parasites would have died off. John St. Julian actually talked about fasting for a while because he had some parasite problems. Not everything can be solved by fasting, so obviously do your research on that. But regardless, everything that leads you to freedom is good, because that leads you to life. Everything that leads you to slavery, whether it be a slave to eating the wrong kinds of foods, or a slave to your sin, a slave to your lust or whatever, slave to another person, whatever leads you into slavery is probably a bad decision, and whatever leads you into freedom is a good decision. And so we have good and bad, these terms in this world of contrast, where there's a good and bad. That may be where the whole idea about eating the tree of good and bad came from, eating from the tree of good and bad. It could be the knowledge that something is good for you versus something that is bad for you. It doesn't have to be a necessarily bad thing, but in the end, everything is good because what was bad taught you about what was good. And so it's ultimately all good that you're learning and coming to a better knowledge of things. And so that might be the tree of life. Going from the tree of good and evil, thinking things are good or bad, the Demiurge belief, etc., that somehow there's bad in the world. But you get back to the tree of good, the tree of life, where you just think everything's good. It's just branching off the same tree. You don't see things in a dualistic manner anymore. And yes, in here it talks about the good and evil in pairs, whereas, Christ came and then there's the anti-Messiah and, Noah versus the Nephilim and everything. And I'm not going to read this completely, but it does lead to people who are in, some would say, New Age, but or Luciferianism and all that stuff, and whatever labels we put on things don't really work. And I'm really not keen on labels, but there is a way to twist everything. So for everything that can be understood in the spirit of good, the same thing can be understood in the spirit of bad. And so this part of the Nazarene Acts talks about the people who would use it in a bad way. So I'm going to read from this one, chapter 5, Good and Evil. And then the old man said, "There is a saying very prevalent among the Greek philosophers to the effect that there is in reality neither good nor evil in the life of man, but that men call things good or evil as they appear to them, prejudiced by the use and custom of life. For not even murder is really an evil because it sets the spirit free from the bonds of flesh. Further, they say that even just judges put to death those who commit crimes. But if they knew homicide to be an evil, just men would not do that. Neither do they say that adultery is an evil, for if the husband does not know or does not care, there is, they say, no evil in it. But neither, say they, is theft an evil, for it takes away what one does, not possession from another who has it. And indeed, it ought to be taken freely and openly, but in that it is done secretly, that is rather a reproof of his inhumanity from whom it is secretly taken. For all men ought to have the common use of all things that are in this world. But through injustice one says that this is his, and another that that is his, and so division is caused among men. In short, a certain man, the wisest among the Greeks, knowing that these things are so, says that the Havarim, that is, friends or close associates of equal status, should have all things common. Now in all things, unquestionably, wives are included. He says also that as the air and the sunshine cannot be divided, so neither ought other things to be divided, which are given in this world to all to be possessed in common, but should be so possessed. But I wish to say this, because I am desirous to turn to well-doing, and I cannot act well unless I first learn what is good, and if I can understand that, I will thereby perceive what is evil, that is, opposite to good. And that chapter goes on and on and on about the stars in the heaven and the way the astrological signs worked, the way they thought they worked back then, and it's a little bit difficult to understand. So I'm just going to read something else from what they really considered good versus evil. So this is on my Golden Rule page, and there's a couple of videos. There's the Get Attuned to Yah's Frequency. I'll leave the link below, as always. So here we go. It says, this quote is from the Clementine Homilies, Book 7, the Golden Rule. Be of one mind in many bodies. Let each man be minded to do his neighbor those good things he wishes for himself. And you may all find out what is good by holding some such conversation as the following with yourselves. You would not like to be murdered. Do not murder another man. You would not like your wife to be seduced by another. Do not you commit adultery. You would not like any of your things to be stolen from you. Steal nothing from another. And so understanding by yourselves what is reasonable and doing it, you will become dear to God and will obtain healing. Otherwise, in the life which now is, your bodies will be tormented. In that which is to come, your souls will be punished. So if we want to know what's good, we just have to understand how we would feel if we were in that situation, doing what that person was doing or having that be done unto us. And of course, they mention adultery and everything like that. So you can get a clear view of their, whether or not somebody should be murdered. If you committed a crime, would you want to be killed for that crime? Or would you want some time to be able to repent and change your life? If you weren't repentant, then would you understand why they killed you? And I would think that if you were unrepentant in this life and then passed over and had to go through that lake of fire, like you can see in my article, where you have to judge yourself as what you've done to others, then you would understand why they decided to do what they did and kill you. And you would know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. And of course, our Father knows. And if anybody does anything evil, then our Father is the one who will deal with that. And they will be suffering the consequences currently. Even though you can't see it, doesn't mean that they're not suffering the consequences. So we just have to focus on ourselves, do what we would want done unto us to others. And it doesn't matter if they repent or not. As I've stated, if you are still holding on to unforgiveness for somebody who has not repented, that means you are saying that you want to be their slave. Because it's not until you forgive them, even if they're still unrepentant, but it's not until you forgive them that you're set free. So if you want to be set free, you need to be the one to forgive them of that. And just understand that they're going through this stuff too. If we were all born sinless, then it is the world at large that is creating these sinful people. If we want to have less sinful people in this world, what we need to do is focus on changing ourselves so we can change the world through the Essene mirrors. And then when we change the world, the people growing up in this world will not be led down to evil. And I think that's where we're headed. A beautiful world. And I see it because I'm focusing on myself and trying to heal myself and work on myself. And when we do that, we can see the world sort of catching up to us because of the Essene mirrors. So if you haven't seen my videos on the Essene mirrors, the law of attraction, etc., you can see that. And I'll leave playlists, links, etc. below. Thank you for listening, and I hope this helped you to understand my perspective. Shalom.
Chris White once coined the phrase short-term New World Order freakout syndrome to explain what it's like to have your perception of the world shattered. Of course, it's not just about the shape of the world, whether it's flat, round, or something else entirely. This New World Order freakout often includes now saying no to GMOs, fluoride, vaccines, and pharmaceuticals. It's a complete overhaul to your lifestyle. And trying to explain that mainstream media is just propaganda to promote false flags, division, and more can really put a strain on your relationships. Have you gotten tired of being mocked by your own family for what you share? We've all been there. Are you treated like the black sheep because of the commandments you keep? I get it. We're all trying to figure things out together, but sometimes you just have to let your family and friends be. Plant the seed and wait and see. But while you wait for them to catch up, do you wish you had someone to talk with who gets it? That's what Truth or Talk is for. Being able to discuss what's going on in your life and what you're interested in without feeling like you're going to be judged as a crazy conspiracy theorist who should be on drugs or committed. No subject is taboo, and I'd love to hear from you. Simply truthertalk.com. Simply make an appointment and let's talk, Truther. Beliefs,